What's up guys? In today's video, I'm going to show you how to channel your inner VuKah Brawler and dominate Embervale with nothing but your own grit and determination. Now, I'm your boy Winter Phoenix, and if this video helps you in any way, please leave a like and a comment below to let me know how I'm doing and if you want more builds just like this one. Now without further ado, this build is going to show you how to have the most fun with a melee build and still be viable at all stages of the game. This is a very involved playstyle and build, so if your brain isn't wired for critical thinking, then you, my friend, are watching the wrong video, and you actually want to check out my rogue mage build instead. Not that there's anything against mage builds or mages in general, it's just the playstyle between that one and this one is going to be much different. Let's jump right into the armor. Now before we dive right into the action, let's take a look at what's going to actually keep us in these fights, and that starts with our armor. For this build, we're looking for very specific stats to really emphasize our wild side. The first piece of armor to assist us in this build will be the soldier's helmet. It gives us a boost to melee critical strike chance by 15% and critical strike damage by 12%. This helmet checks all the boxes and is a staple in our performance. Next is the soldier chest piece. Not only does it look absolutely badass, but it also comes with a whopping 240 HP and 24 bonus stamina, which will be utilized later in the examples as we jump around from the ground, slam enemies into the ground, and so on and so forth. For the gloves, we have the most flexibility as no one pair is specifically tailored for our build. You can run mage gloves to help with some of our attacks, but it doesn't do too much of a difference in the long run. There's also some gloves that give you damage against melee enemies, which are up in your face. You might make the argument for those as well, but again, just the most flexible piece you have is the gloves, so have fun with it. I chose the warden gloves because again, I like the style. The VuKah Brawler doesn't have the leisure of pants, but we do, and we go with the Archmage trousers for that little boost in mana and +2 for mana regeneration. The second stat is a little wasted considering the rest of the build, but it still helps out a little bit. To finish it all off, we have a pair of Mystic boots for the +3 health regeneration, and the regeneration delay is vital in keeping us alive and out of that respawn screen. Now, you might start to think we don't have much damage reduction in the armor, but that's because we gain our stats through skills and actual combat. There's also a cap on the damage reduction done to you at 60%, so anything else over that is just empty stats. We can't really afford that since our style of play is going to be much more involved than the typical mage approach that I mentioned earlier. Again, so we don't really want to have any wasted stats. We want to kind of utilize every single opportunity we can to fully flesh out this build in general. For the rings, we have two very specific ones, and they really just kind of add the flavor to our build. These cannot be substituted unless you find a stronger one that provides the same stat lines though. These rings are the Ring of the Endless Life for that 3% life leech, and the Ring of Rapacity. This one looks pretty boring, but don't underestimate that +20 mana regeneration. This ring alone is the reason this build is half as fun as it really is. You'll see in a few what I mean. For our weapons, we start at the staff. Yes, this is a melee build, but there are some parts of the game where range is required to progress. Our staff isn't anything special outside its ability to use ranged skills, so we have a pretty standard Elder's staff. It does give us a small boost in our mana pool, and that'll make traversal that much easier. You'll see what I mean soon enough, but for our first weapon we actually have the two-handed guillotine. I chose this weapon to show that it's not the weapon that makes the build, but your own ability, so feel free to use any two-hander that you really want. Our second weapon is a White Wolf sword, and we use this when we're surrounded and want to turn our brains off for a few. This sword actually sends damage back to the attackers as you jump around the battlefield. It's a very underrated perk in my opinion. You may also see the wand in my hotbar, but ignore that. Our third weapon is actually nothing more than the tried and true, these hands. I'm not joking. These hands are rated E for everyone, and it is a blast. But next on the checklist is our consumables. Before you go skipping ahead, listen to this next part. Food is very vital in Enshrouded, and these foods have been tested and hand-picked for this build very specifically. So sit your ass down and buckle up because we're talking about meat. More specifically, the meat wraps. These give you 5 constitution for extra HP and 1 intelligence for our melee attacks. No stats are wasted here, and it's perfect for what we're trying to accomplish. Next is a wheat product thanks to the flatbreads from the oven, and it's the open sandwich. This sandwich gives us 4 strength to punch bigger holes in enemies and 2 constitution for more HP when they don't go down immediately. Topped off with a little fruit bowl for 6 HP regeneration to pair with our armor perks and 3 stamina recharge to help with our antics out on the battlefield. We're looking pretty good. We also like to bring the Flask of the Fell for more overall stamina and clean bandages for those times that we need a little TLC out there. And if you want to use those Prayer of the Flame scrolls you got lying around or stacked up in your boxes, this build can take full advantage of the extra 20% magic damage. Now, for the meat and potatoes you all came for, the skill tree. We start with well rested for that extra 5 minutes on our rested buff. Grab the spirit point on your way to Counter-Strike. This passive has a 20% chance to return 50% of the damage back to the attacker as fire damage. As melee, you're going to be face tanking a lot of enemies, and this passive just makes sense as an added bonus to be the leading beefcake Embervale really needs. Updrafts will also help in getting around because this build actually has the capabilities to get up and go from any point. Airborne for that 30% stamina reduction as we are flying around the world quite often. Now, instead of going right into the tank and warrior tree that really represents the vicious VuKah champion, we need a way to connect with him, and that's through our fist. Go back to the trickster tree and take the 1 point in spirit before taking the skill Be Gone. This skill lights our hands with mana and stuns anyone we connect with, allowing follow-up damage and a way to even control the battlefield. At first glance, 30 mana a smack is a lot, but remember, our Ring of Opacity will cover any mana loss, so this skill is more viable more often than you might initially believe. Afterwards, we go into Merciless Attack just for those times where we do stun enemies enough. But at that point, we're just playing with our food, so you might as well have fun while you're doing it. This skill activates as we overpower enemies by filling up their stun bar through either attacking their block or parrying their attacks. It's niche, but nothing makes you feel more connected to the wild as gutting a clumsy VuKah troll. Next, we grab the Constitution and then Shiny Plates. 10% isn't a huge number, but our skill tree will start to stack these stats and make up for what our armor doesn't. Heavy Plates next for more armor, then work your way to Tower for that 10% damage reduction when 3 or more enemies are around. And this means anything from the wildlife fighting in the background or even enemies above you will proc this skill. Same thing for Warden, but it just blocks magic damage for 15% instead. We're actually going to take this extra strength node and both of the following nodes from our defensive skills as well. Then Earth Aura, because even if you're solo, this still procs. You don't need to be in a group to gain this skill's benefit. Then go ahead and grab that final node in Thick Skin. There's a current bug in the game that only applies points for levels 2 and 4 of the flame. So even if you haven't managed to get your flame up to level 6 yet, don't worry, you aren't missing any stats the rest of the community already has. Until this is fixed, then you gotta get yourself together. In order to really be king of the lands, that includes the Shroud, so we gotta take Purification to increase our time in the Shroud as we kill the enemies native to those areas. We work across the warrior path and take the warrior's path. This passive increases our damage with melee weapons by 10%. Take the 2 side nodes for the boost in our overall stat line, and then here's where you can choose your own path. Whichever weapon you end up settling on, take a look at that type of damage that it does. Whether it be cutting, blunt, or piercing, then opt in that corresponding path for more damage in your attacks. Take Feast to cross over into the Barbarian tree. This will increase our overall beefiness when we eat meat and give us an extra 15% total HP. Now we introduce ourselves to the Barbarian tree with Heavy Handed. The passive increases the amount of stun an enemy takes when you attack into their block. Later game, this doesn't happen as often, but for mid-game stuff you can really take advantage of this. After that, we grab all 3 of the little nodes on our way to Relentless. This is another personal flavor choice, as I wanted to favor the 2-hander setup for more of that barbarian feeling. But again, it's dealer's choice here. Heavy specialization is interesting because some say that it works and some say that it doesn't. After doing some research of my own, I find that it does help, but not enough to matter. Let me explain. Yes, you attack faster, but it's not fast enough as the animations are still overall slow, and there's no super armor in the game. Meaning that even though I might get this attack off faster, it's not going to do anything if I can't deliver it. Hopefully this gets fixed someday, but for now, take it for those times where you manage to get behind some big enemies and you can take advantage of an extra attack or 2. It's not like we can skip the skill anyway, because what we want is at the end of the tree, and that's Blood Rage. This skill gives you those red light glows around your hands, and that means it's game on. This increases the damage any melee weapon does by 20% after the first enemy in the area is killed within 10 meters. Now again, I've done a bit of research and the 10 meters seems to be a little further than they intended. This passive is almost always on, even at home in my mountain base when I'm not in combat. Just the nearby wildlife thriving and maintaining the circle of life is enough to keep this passive up. I don't know if this is intended, but if you don't ask questions you don't want the answers to, you won't get upset. And finally, we come to the cherry on top when we scoot on over to the athlete tree and grab jump attack. This gives us our powerful slam to honor the VuKah Brawler and turn our enemies into mashed potatoes. We do an extra 50% weapon damage and a small AoE when attacking from a jump. Jump over an enemy and slam it to the ground for big damage, just like our former champion used to do. But wait, we're not done yet. Next, we take double jump because we want to do it better. This skill also allows us to take flight from any position in the game with this build. But not only that, it gives us access to jump attack 2, which further increases our damage done by an additional 20%. This tops off the core of the build, and now we're ready to savage the lands any way you want. Now before we go into examples on how this build actually works, I want to show you the stats before and after we eat our food, so you can get a better understanding of how effective this all really can be. Here are our stats prior to any buffs, and here are our stats after we've already eaten. As you can see, we get a huge boost to our overall HP and an extra 20% in our overall melee damage, meaning we can put out big numbers of damage to large crowds of mobs while taking that much more punishment with our larger health pool. In this clip, I want to show you how the entire build functions. You can see our armor buff proc when we're facing a few enemies at the same time, diminishing the advantage of being swarmed. You'll also get to see how we utilize the ability Begone to control the battlefield and get free damage off whenever possible. After every 2-piece I throw, take a look at the mana regen. That is the effect of the Ring of Rapacity. Also notice that we need to constantly be jumping around in order to dodge incoming attacks and even set up our offense with our Counter-Strike abilities. That includes the follow-up attack after a dodge and our superior double jump slam attack. With both of these options at your disposal, the only thing holding you back from dominating Embervale is you yourself. So drop those 10 runes to respec and give this godly melee build a spin. It's engaging and effective, the most fun I've had with a build so far. Like and subscribe. Later, nerds.